welcome to the Queer Divorce Club podcast. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thanks, Tera. I'm thrilled to be here. I
It's
never thought in my wildest dreams that I would ever be on a queer divorce podcast.
I think all of us didn't think that, but I'm so glad it's here and we get to share the experiences about this thing that we thought we'd never go through. So I appreciate you being here to talk with me about it today. Can you give us a little bit to start us off, a background of your own experience with divorce and where you're at today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the frame for my story is that my parents were married for 41 years and I grew up Catholic. So resonates with any of your listeners, it is true when I tell you divorce is the ultimate failure. It's a failure of you as a person, of a family, of a society that that it's just failure on every level. And when I was early in the when divorce started to become a viable option, I thought, oh, I have no experience with divorce. I have no frame of reference for this. And then when I really sat down and thought about it, my grandmother got divorced. I had friends whose parents were divorced, but we didn't talk about it at all. So that when I was
Mhm.
growing up, it wasn't even, I didn't even think about it, right? But it's always
Mhm.
kind of been a part of my life experience. But it is that sort of, oh, it had never happened to me.
Mhm.
And it's part that, well, I'm definitely going to be successful no matter what, but also who wants to admit to being a failure? Like, I'm
Mhm.
gonna, heck or high water, this is never going to be a part of my story. So, that's kind of where I started out with thinking about divorce and just my own, is this even possible for me, frame. And where I am today is, I don't know that the pain of that life change ever really goes away, but there's such a peace around it of, I know I made the right choice. And I think of divorce just like any other life transition. It has a neutrality. There's no good or bad. It's a direction and a choice, just like anything else we do in our lives.
Mhm. That's a good reframe that I've been having to think about a lot too, because I also grew up Catholic. My mom got divorced though when I was younger, and I saw her go through the process of the shame she had to experience from the church, the divorce process she had to go through with the church. This isn't a podcast about being Catholic and getting divorced, but it is a huge cultural aspect when we're younger, especially growing up in the 80s and 90s when divorce started to become more prevalent, that you can get divorced, but it's shameful. And I feel like all of my friends I knew that had divorced parents, it was like we were sort of in this kind of shame club that we didn't talk about, but then we were all friends because our parents were divorced. It was interesting to think about. So I'm glad that we're reframing, and divorce is a choice that we all get to make based on our lifestyle. And the dedication of marriage is something that we also get to make that choice of. So, anyways, I'm glad that you started with that. So, how long have you been divorced now that we're talking?
Well, I have a pretty complex remarriage divorce story. I got divorced, like official. I actually got divorced by email. I didn't know they could do that these days,
Oh,
but it was funny because I was doing a leadership retreat thing and we happened to be in one of Abe Lincoln's old courtrooms. I am from Illinois, and so we
mhm.
were visiting the courtroom, and I got the email that said I was divorced. So I thought that was funny that no matter what, I couldn't get out of going to court. But the paperwork was signed in October of 2021, and I got remarried in November of 2021,
Mhm.
which I think is a testament to something that folks coming from a more straight-centered worldview going into
Mhm.
a queer-centered worldview have to adjust to, is that timelines and the linear time almost
Mhm.
doesn't exist. Yeah, it was a month between when I got divorced and when I got remarried, but this is a story that has been unfolding for years.
Mhm.
So, and what is today? Today is we're in June
June.
of 2023.
Yes, yes.
Wow. Yeah, so I've been divorced for a little bit. I probably a noob. I don't know if there's a, like, how long you've been divorced hierarchy, but it still feels pretty new for me.
Yeah. Maybe we're coming up with a new word for it. I don't know. Noob gets thrown on everything. I'm a noob too. I've been legally divorced just for a year. But like you said, the divorce process, especially in a queer divorce, we're thinking about the timeline, the process coming out for some people. It might not be that linear space. And when you're legally divorced is different than when you got separated. Like I
Yes.
think about my separation time was I had told my ex-husband that I wanted to get a divorce in May. We weren't legally divorced until the next year in June. That's a whole, I feel like I was separated from him way before we were actually legally divorced as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Mm-hmm.
can we pause on this timeline thing
Yeah,
for a moment?
yeah, yeah.
But you know, I'm a storyteller, and the thing
Mm-hmm.
that I've been studying in my story research for years has been before and after stories, and
Mm-hmm.
how personal transformations get sort of distilled down to a moment. And that
Mm-hmm.
moment in a divorce story is when the divorce is final. And when we tend to tell that story, it's like, well, I've only been in divorce for a year, or well, we're not quite divorced yet. I know someone who has been with their queer partner for almost 15 years and they're still not divorced from their their first
Oh
spouse.
my God.
And that's just how they live their lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? Finance
Yeah.
and property and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we are taking even a coming out story where it's like, well, the moment you came out, that's the beginning of your new life. That's how
Mm-hmm.
these things. But if we take a step back and expand that story for even longer, like a divorce story can almost happen before a separation. I mean, there's that
Yeah.
contemplation phase and there's that self-discovery phase. And if it's not included as part of the full picture, then we're really just getting to the, well, when did you get divorced? And
Mm-hmm.
that discounts a lot of really rich, meaningful experiences that I think you're doing right by in this podcast by giving people a place to talk about those in-betweens and messy middles and
Mm-hmm.
things before and after, decisions are made.
Yeah. The actual divorce decree date is one date that's part of an entire journey that we're all taking through life and separation and all of those things. I was reading I'm glad that you brought it up in your essay in Autostraddle about your journey with co-parenting and deciding to get divorced. So part of that for you was starting to figure out what family meant. And is an actual divorce a physical divorce, meaning you're destroying your family, separating it? Um, you know, will a family exist after you make this decision? So how did you come to that realization that divorce wasn't actually going to destroy, can you see my air quotes? You can on the YouTube, but not on the podcast, destroy your family, and think about restructuring or reframing the idea of what family means to you.
I love this question, and I'm glad that you pulled that out of the essay because this is the thing that I probably struggled with the most. I mean, it took the entire time of that pre-contemplation phase, the decision making, the separation to really, and even still, I have to remind myself that through this choice of creating my chosen family, there the language of destruction is not a place I want to go. When I was originally thinking about destruction, and that's the sort of mantra that was playing over in my head is like, if you want this, you are destroying your family. If you make this choice, you're destroying your family. Like, everything I did was, I thought, going in the direction of destruction. I remember
Mm-hmm.
first call I made to a divorce attorney, the first time I saw a parenting plan packet, and both of those times I was just on the floor sobbing because this signified that I was taking action to destroy my family. And again, when I took a step back and I looked at the bigger picture and I thought, well, what is family? And I've been queer my whole life, and actually that's actually how my husband and I met. We met at the birthday party of a woman that I was in love with. Frankly, real honesty,
Love it.
radical vulnerability for your listener. He knew that from day one. He knew I
Mm-hmm.
was there. He knew who I was, and through the evolution of our relationship, it seems to people that, oh, you got divorced because you came out, or oh, you got divorced because you're gay. And even if that were true, that's fine. That's not my story, but that's what
Mm-hmm.
it seems on the outside. And so I had to think about, I know the concept of chosen family. I teach gender studies, right? I teach about chosen family, and for some reason I couldn't apply it to my own life. But when I really thought about, well, who are my chosen family? And I think about my family of origin. They live about 2.5 hours away from me. I don't see them every day. We talk on the phone a lot, but not all the time. They're not involved in major, life decisions. We don't share a bank account. They're still my family. And so why couldn't I apply that same idea of family to a person with whom I did have all those legal obligations and was part of a marriage, and now I no longer have that same kind of connection? It reminded me a lot of, at some point I grew up in my parents' house and they bought my groceries, and they cared for me when I was a kid. The nature of our relationship has changed. It didn't destroy our
Mm-hmm.
parent-child relationship. It's just taking on a new form. And
Mm-hmm.
when I removed that shame of divorce as a failure, it became really clear that, oh no, this is just a reimagination of family. And there's a loss there for sure. I still feel that loss. But
Mm-hmm.
again, reminding myself more and more, the more I did that, the stronger my conviction got in that this was the right thing to do. And that ultimately everyone in my family would be better served by this decision.
Yeah. Do you think that the grief is related to the changing of the relationship? Obviously, restructuring the relationship can cause that grief, but also partly to that shame, sort of still being feeling the shame and the restructuring at the same time.
Yeah, sure. Because I've got a 10-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And we're separated and divorced when he was 7 or 8. And again, not having that experience of my own, or hearing the cultural stories about kids from a broken home and kids are permanently scarred by divorce, and all of those messages that I was really internalizing, was like, how could I do this to him? How
Mhm.
could I make his life worse?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be the mark of a good mom, to destroy
Hmm.
intentionally, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's still that, you know, the grief of what I thought my life was going to be, the story I thought I could tell about my life. I imagined that I would have a story like my parents, where we were together for decades and we got through the hard times and we didn't call it quits, which again is part of the failure story, right?
Hmm.
Success is stay legally married no matter what. And I'm sure we all know of relationships that would probably be better served by ending, but they continue on because, in part of the story, that you have to see it through, you have to stick together. So the grief is my life went in a totally different direction than I thought.
Hmm.
I know that this decision caused harm to people, even if it's only temporary or if it's, ultimately a good thing. But still, the grief of what I thought was going to happen still comes up every once in a while.
Hmm. Yeah, that grief is an absolute, that's, I think if all of us have in common through a divorce is that there is grief in that change. And so that's important to remember. We each have our story of what that grief entails, but all of us have that because it's a big change in our life. It's a huge change in our life.
Mhm.
If you were explain to me right now, who is in your family and what would you consider your family to be?
After all I said about you, we got a ton
After
of
all that,
people.
who is it? Who is it? Yeah. You don't have to name them personally, but
Yeah, I would, my spouse is certainly a part of my family, and my kid, and we have different names for different ways we can figure that. Like, so in when it's the three of us, our initials end up being KND. So we're the kind crew. That's the three of us together. And then
Mhm.
when our kid's dad is with us, and his people, then we have a different configuration. And that, I think, has been really helpful too, that the nuclear family of this is the so and so's is really static, and it doesn't account for all of those changes that might happen in a family. So if folks are kind of struggling with that, that's one thing I would recommend is, who's in your family now, who's in your family when you are at home, who's in your family when you're at a reunion or a barbecue or a pride celebration or something. Like,
Mhm.
those family configurations can be different depending on where you're at and who you're with. And I don't mean that to be a cop out. I mean, like, you asked me a question and I refuse. But it can be complicated to figure out. And I think there's a
Hmm.
different feeling with each of those families. Like, and that's coming through work of boundaries, right? In order to
Yeah.
love you, what our relationship, or in order for us to maintain a relationship, this is what it has to look like. So, for example, I don't go on vacation with my ex-husband. That's just not a thing we ever really did,
Hmm.
and not something he's interested in doing now. So we just don't, and that's one of our boundaries. So a family vacation is just the kind crew. It's the three of us. But if we are going to the movies, I'll invite him and his people to come too, because that's part of a family situation. So I think boundaries really define who family is, and what, what your contracts are with them. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
but yeah, in my house there are three humans and probably too many pets.
I'm just
Make
thinking
your
as you're I'm just thinking as you're talking about that, about how as I was growing up, I was taught this is our nuclear family, we do everything together, and how freeing it is to actually think about the different types of relationships you have with different people in different spaces. So, but we do that naturally over time, but we don't think about them as our family. So we have our friends, we have maybe our book club, we have people who we work with. These are different groups of people we have different boundaries set with in different spaces. And then I think it's important for us to teach our kiddos how to do that as well, and how to affirm our relationships are healthy in each of those spaces. So I really like how you talk about that you have your family structure is different in different spaces that you're in, but it's what's really important is the relationship with those people and how you set boundaries with those people in each of those spaces. Hmm. um, you talk about a little bit about how you co-parent with your ex-husband and how that works for the two of you.
Yeah, so we are very lucky. I know that not everyone has an amicable, friendly relationship with their ex, but and I sometimes joke that we probably just should have stayed friends. Like, we've always been really good friends, and that's something that's maintained in this new version of our relationship. But the co-parenting piece, when I think about, again, the step back, the whole picture of our story, I think every parenting couple, whatever you want to call that, is in a co-parenting relationship. I think that was an interesting revelation too. It's like, well, just because we don't live in the same house doesn't mean we're suddenly co-parenting. We've always been doing the negotiation of, who's gonna watch the kid while the grocery shopping's done, or how do we
Hmm.
make decisions together about our child, or all of those things that we call co-parenting are already happening in two or more adult families. So now that we live in separate houses, the thing I've noticed that is the biggest change is that when we were together, I don't know if you or listeners have seen the mental load cartoon. I think it's by Emma Cat, maybe, but it
Hmm.
basically describes how in heteronormative relationships, the woman ends up taking on the vast majority of remembering, that the furnace filter needs to be replaced, and where to
Hmm.
buy the cat, who the kids, I almost said who the kid's vet is, who the kid's pediatrician is, and when they
Yeah.
had like all of those things I would remember, and I knew, and I just made the appointments and went to get the things and paid the bills just because I knew those things. Well, now in co-parenting, we don't have that kind of relationship anymore. The communication has to be incredibly clear,
Hmm.
because I'm not taking on a lot of that behind the scenes mental and emotional labor. And that's definitely something I've been working on. And particularly as my spouse has come in as a co-parent too, is that my ex-husband and I have almost, we were in a relationship, a dating relationship for almost 20 years. We have a lot of shorthand where he can say, I'm on my way. I know exactly what that means. I know where he's at and how far he is, because he usually sends me this message when he's 5 minutes away. But my spouse doesn't know that. And so there were lots of questions like, what does that mean? Where are you? How do I fit into this?
Yeah.
So breaking that down to the basic component parts of who, what, where, when, why in communication has definitely been a change. And I think the decision making too. It's taken a lot for me to let go of, I know what's best for our kid and I know all of these things. So of course my decisions are always going to be the right one. There's a lot of letting go and letting him do it his own way.
How do you let go? What's worked for you? Mantras, it sounds like it's one of
Yeah.
those.
A lot of
Um,
mindfulness, a lot of remembering, a lot of I think it's also that it's remembering from my kid's perspective. Because he is going through something that I've never gone through before. He's got his own grief and his own ways that things have changed. And I can't control things that are not happening outside my sphere of family, right?
mhm,
And so it's just as important for my kid to experience his dad doing things his own way as it is for him to see me growing, thriving, making my own choices. Like he deserves
mhm.
to see how that works with the both of us because for too long he only saw my way of doing things.
Right.
And I remember to let go and that he's got to see that. That's an experience that he gets to have. And maybe is part of the collateral damage of the divorce, right? Is that I can't control anything and this is the way it's going to be. If they,
Mhm,
I can't think of any specific example, but the thing uh on the Kind crew, we do a lot of nature walks and
mhm.
we're outside a lot. That's not something my kid is going to do with his dad because he's not into that. It's not good or bad. That's just not
Yeah.
an experience he's going to have
Mhm,
with them. They're doing more like video game, movie, comic book stuff,
mhm,
which is not necessarily going to happen in my house. So it's again that multiplicity of experience, and it's really hard to let go sometimes because
mhm.
I've been doing this a long time, and it's just a habit.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking about how it sounds like your houses and my houses are similar. Like my partner, Carly, and I take the kids on hikes a lot and we're outside a lot and camping a lot. I don't even think they've been outside at their dad's house since we got divorced. I mean, that's a hyperbole, obviously, but it's completely separate households. Like bedtimes are different, screen time's different. We tried to talk about those things. So we also had to release control. And for me, it's helped. It sounds like it's helped for you too, for your kiddo to think about how this is his whole life. That you get to, he half the time is at dad's, watching a lot of screen or movies, going to comic book stores. And the other half of the time he's with me in nature. And that's a holistic life. When I think about it, like it's important to have all of those things when it comes down to it.
It's true. And I have a question for
Mhm.
you. I'm curious about your
Sure.
hiking style. When you were together with your ex, was that an activity that you kind of tried to force on the whole family? Like, this is what we're doing now because I like to go hiking?
Sometimes I wanted to be outside way more, but my ex was a very inside person. He would admit to that, I'm sure. He's like, I'm an inside person. So I would bring the kids outside and push some of that. But now my new partner is an outside person. And so she's pulled more of that out of me. So I think my kids are seeing a different side of me as a parent too. Like this is my whole self. So that's been something that's different for them, I think, seeing me in a
Interesting.
different way.
I remember reading it wasn't the Babysitters Club, it was a Babysitters Club spin-off about a different, like one of the babysitter's cousins or something.
Hmm.
I'm hoping there's a listener out there right now who's, yes, I read that too. But the main character of this particular book had parents who were divorced, and it was scandalous. It was this, horrible thing. And I think her name, I can't remember her name, but I remember very clearly this moment where she's talking about, I think her brother's name is Jacob, and somebody calls this kid Jacob Tutu because he has two of everything, because he has two
Mm,
households.
mm,
And she talks in the narration of the book, this character's talking about how sometimes it's great to have two of everything because if you leave one somewhere, you've got the other one when you get back, but also how horrible it is because you have to remember two different sets of things. And in the beginning of this process, I always went back to that book and remembered how horrible she found it of like, oh, she's split between two parents and but the farther I go into this journey, the more I appreciate that piece where she does talk about, oh, I get two of these things. I have my bedroom here and I have my bedroom over there and I get to decorate it differently and it gets to be And so I think for my kid being 10, you know, having that different kind of experience is fun sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that is an experience that I wish I had as when I was a kid, because everything I had was just one of everything.
Right.
So that there is fun and novelty in this double household experience too. And I should
Yeah.
say one of our co-parenting agreements early on was that we wouldn't refer to our houses as like mom's house or dad's house. We would call the location by its street name.
Mm.
And so, oh, we've got to go pick it up from this lane or this street. And I think that's helped equalize it for my kid. It's because we right now don't have 50-50 custody. So I don't want it to seem like, oh, this one place is home, but this one other place isn't. No, they're both homes in different ways, just like when we visit our family, in other places of the country, those are still homes. We just
Mm-hmm.
don't spend 365 there.
Right, right. Do you think that helps with the idea of also maybe like dad's house, dad's rules, mom's house, mom's rules? Like this is my house everywhere and I get to be a whole person in all those spaces.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. And it also helps in the letting go of like, yeah, this what you do over there is your your business. Um,
Yeah.
but also that we can fall back on that with our kid and say, I know that's how you do that at the house, where the house is, street name. But here we do it this way. And
Hmm.
so avoiding that terminology of like, well, my house, my rules, it's like, no, in this space, this is what we do. Just like you'd have different rules at school, at the grocery
Hmm.
store. There are different ways to act and different rules when you're in those spaces. So this is just another space in your life where there are values and rules and ways of being in community that we've all agreed to by virtue of being in this space.
Yeah. And I could see how that could be freeing for the kiddo to think about themselves in that way because they do that already, right? I'm at school, I'm at church for some people, I'm at soccer practice or whatever, that this is another space that I'm in, but I'm still a person. There's still these other, basic rules and foundations for my life. That's
Exactly.
wonderful. I love that. Speaking about your house a little bit, you now have a spouse. Well, quickly after your physical divorce, but through the process, you blended your family with adding this extra person. What, how is that going, and what have been some of the successes and hurdles you've seen for blending family and adding a bonus parent for your kiddo?
Yeah, I love the language of bonus parents because my kid has two moms. And it was so funny last year for Mother's Day, came home from school so mad. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, well, my teacher said I had to make two Mother's Day projects because I have two moms. He loves that. He loves the idea of having two moms, and it's really my spouse is non-binary, but prefers the identifier of mom in this case. So I think it feels like being together for a relatively short period of time, the challenges have been enormous because we're not only, when we met, I was not divorced. It was during the pandemic. So we were separated and had been for a while, but, we were in separate bedrooms. And my kid thought this was the greatest because he was always jealous that, mom and dad get to sleep in the same bed, but I don't have a sleeping buddy. That's what he would say. Yeah, we thought this was very equitable, that we all got our own bedrooms, and that was fine. Um, but because of the pandemic and everything, I happened to meet someone from Montreal. And I mentioned earlier, I live in Illinois. So, you can get out a map. That's a pretty significant difference. And so, part of the reason that we got married as quickly as we did is because the borders were closed. There were some loopholes or ways that they hadn't really thought out the rules about the border crossing, but at the time the border was closed, and we thought if we have any chance of making this work, like we have to get married and start that process. So through the green card process, and it was basically my spouse moved to the States and stayed. So that family transition, that loss, and they did not have any kids to bring with the relationship. So, that was a bit less of a transition, but becoming a parent to an
Mhm.
8-year-old for the first time ever. And, at the time, my kid's feelings were really charged with, you kicked dad out. And what he said to me one day was, you kicked dad out of his natural habitat, which both made me laugh and cry because what an
Yeah.
interesting thing to say. But it was all very quick,
Mhm.
and kids, I don't know that kids, certainly my kid, I don't think did understand the separation piece, that we're not
Right.
together, but we're still
Mhm.
in the same house. And now all of a sudden we're not, and I have this new person in my life. So my kid and spouse met through video calls. They and I did not even meet in person. We met in January of 21. We didn't meet in person until May of 21, because of all the border crossing rules. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's this person who's been on Zoom for the last couple of months, and now they're here in my house, and my dad is not here. So
Yeah.
a lot of therapy with that, a lot of working through tough feelings, and it was a really difficult time. And I don't know, even if there's not another partner coming into a reconfigured family relationship, that that grief is still there. And
Mhm.
the I don't know, there's something about the I wouldn't have changed anything. We did what we needed to do, and we're working through it. But that adjustment to parenting, I think, was difficult. And me being a co-parent with someone who I don't have all of that shorthand with, and who doesn't know all the things that I know,
Mhm.
experienced, US health insurance, there's all these things that I never really had to think about or work through, are now suddenly I have to go back and go through every step. So uh I mean, where we're at now, the green card has arrived. I'm actually talking to you from Canada right now because we were been able to visit Montreal
Mhm.
family for the first time in almost 2 years. So that's really special. And yeah, and my kid has new grandparents and aunts and uncles and
Mhm.
uh, cousins, and even as challenging as that has been, I think bringing those people into his life has just made it richer.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of different parts of that to unpack, and thank you for walking us through that. I was thinking about, um, I know this isn't about me too, but our stories line up a little bit. I moved in with my current partner about before I was legally divorced, but around we've already been separated for a year and a half. You're right; these timelines don't matter. At some point, we moved in together, and we moved the kids in together. We have 3 kids. I think one of the biggest things for us were, first of all, learning the kids and how to add a new kid to our family. I think every family, when you add a new baby or a second baby or adopt a kiddo or whatever it is, you that changes everything. You have to learn how to parent together. So you have to do this, and adding a bonus parent by already having a set way of parenting that kid, but then adding a new parent to the space. So I think that for us was the biggest hurdle. We had very similar values in parenting, but we still attempted it in different ways. So it sounds like in your space, your spouse didn't have parenting experience before, but I'm sure that they had an idea of what they wanted to be like as a parent or what it would be like. And as we all know, the first time you become a parent, that blows up and you have to figure it out as you go because each kid is different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's a,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of neurodivergence in our house, so it's
Mm-hmm.
that too is, like I said, video games are really important to my kid. Um, the sensory reality of loud video games and seeing them and hearing them is overwhelming a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times for the adults in the house, right? So it's like, how do we negotiate something like screen time when there's a new person who has different kinds of boundaries? But that's one of the ways that my kid and I connected. So uh, me feeling a bit stuck between, how do I honor the sensory needs of my spouse while
Mm-hmm.
also honoring the relationship I have with my kid? And that, I don't know if you've had this balance of, in parenting, like showing that you're still there for your kids, perhaps tinged with that grief of, I've destroyed their lives, and now
Right.
I've got to show up even more,
Mm-hmm.
or in ways with, I also have this other person I'm trying to respect and love and, include in my family dynamic, and I don't always know how.
Yeah.
Don't
What
always know.
things you don't always know how. What things have worked in that space? So there's different ways you can negotiate, different ways you can talk through it, but what's worked specifically for you?
I think being as honest as we can with our kid, and maybe in the beginning we kept too much. I think that's a mistake a lot of folks make, is not wanting to scare kids, or not wanting, before a decision is made, you don't want to reveal too much about what's
Mm-hmm.
going on between their parents. But I think we kept too much from him. And so being honest and encouraging him to be honest too. I like what you said earlier about he can be a whole person in all of these spaces. Part of that being a whole person is being honest about where you're at, what your boundaries are, what you can handle. So just coming right out and saying, we're trying to learn how to figure out how to do this. Here's what mom needs. Here's what I need. Here's what you need. How can we make that all work together?
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely not, you know, as I'm saying it, oh, it sounds easy. It's definitely not to get to those places where you've figured it out. Another thing we've tried to do is we write a lot of things down. So we have a TV schedule, and whoever's time it is for TV, they get to pick what's on it. Other people can be around, but like who decides something is right
Mm-hmm.
there on the piece of paper. And that's a small thing that's been really helpful, because we don't have to do that negotiation. We already decided in a
Mm-hmm.
calm moment, this is how it was going to go. And so this is how it gets enacted, at home. And I think just listening too, the that also sounded kind of flip. You just have to listen. But I have had to learn a lot of curiosity. Again, taking for granted that before I was doing parenting with someone I knew really well and could fill in a lot of gaps for. Well, now
Mm-hmm.
I can't. And I can't presume that I know everything. So I have to ask, if my spouse wants to put a different screen time limit than I would, I can't just go, well, okay, which I did in the beginning, like, okay, well, you're new here, so I guess this is what you're gonna do. It's more like, why is that important to you? Or
Yeah.
here's where I'm coming from. I'd like to know more about why you think this is a good move. And we've found some ways to negotiate around that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think just writing down as many things as you can, and asking those curious questions, because there's a lot of ego in this space, like wanting to do it my way or wanting to do it the way I've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the hardest part of letting go is, okay, it's not all about me anymore.
Yeah.
Never was. The illusion that it was ever about me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've mentioned letting it go a few times on the podcast. I can see. It's true though, when you go through the process, so I felt this too. It's like, I've got this figured out, it must work in the same way again, of course this
Yeah.
kid, but also we've always changed. Your kiddo's going to change. Like I have a 12-year-old now. He's got some of the basic foundations that he's always been, but 12 is so different than 6 or 10
Yeah.
even. Like he changes over time. So even with your kids, everything changes. Right. So it's
Oh yeah.
important. Yeah. You say just listen is being flippant, but I don't think it is. I've been in relationships where listening isn't a number one. I think that others have been too. I think that's important. Listen, be curious, support each other. That's
Yeah,
really
one of
good.
our between my spouse and I, but what we've made a family commitment is to always turn toward each other. So even when there's a conflict, and that triad relationship is interesting too, right? Because there's always seems like there's a two against one in
Mm-hmm.
whatever configuration it happens to be. But even when there's a conflict, we always come back together, and that has been really important, for meltdowns and figuring out logistics. And I don't think that we would have made it as far as we did in any way if we didn't. And it's hard to do sometimes, to turn toward and to be curious and
Mm-hmm.
always come back. But we found it to be really, really foundational. Even with my ex, it's he's a part of our lives. He's a part of our family. He's always going to be. So there's no situation where we can completely discount what he thinks, feels, or believes. It always has to be a part of our math.
Yeah. Yeah. Turning in towards each other. I like that. I think that I've been reading a lot. I don't know, as a new parent starting this podcast, as a parent in a new space, outside of the original nuclear family that I had. I've been reading a ton. And one of the things I always come back to is repair and how important that is for our kids. And it sounds like that's a dedication you've done as a family, is to repair and come back to each other. It sounds foundational and very important.
Huge word in our house. We, even when my kid is having conflicts with others, we don't use, well, we say the word apologize. Like this is a situation where a repair means an apology, or
Mm-hmm.
being more explicit about what that is, but also giving the options for repair. And I never really thought about it in the context of divorce until just this moment. But I wonder if there is a configuration where a divorce is a repair. It's a gesture toward um, accepting and acceptance and respect, and moving forward in a way that isn't filled with resentment or shame or guilt or anger. It is a gesture toward, we can patch this up and be stronger in the next phase of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you're saying that, I felt like a lift of relief actually when I think about divorce. I mean, we started this podcast out thinking about the shame of divorce and all of the failure it is, but thinking about divorce as a repair, as a moment where you're repairing a relationship that was not working for everybody in that space, that it actually can be framed in that way as a recreation of your life and where you're at together and what you need. I really love that. I love that a lot. What would that how can we talk that,
And I
that
think for
makes so much
yourself
sense.
too,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't there's pain no matter what. There's the pain of saying that this is what needs to happen. There's a pain of hearing that this is what is going to happen. And I was the person who said it out loud, like, this isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even now I'm like, I can't even say the divorce word, but this isn't working. We need to end this phase of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
um and and that was a big question that we both had, was like, what does this look like from here? And in talking about the destroying, there's a way that destruction can be, destruction is not necessarily obliteration. we didn't
Right.
we didn't get rid of it, but you can repair something, you can rebuild from the foundational pieces that are there. And that's a metaphor that I've really taken through this process of, if I were going to go out and, maybe a shed in the back got knocked over, I'm going to repair it. I'm going to see what's there, see what works, see what I can salvage, bring in new pieces to support that foundation. And, the goal is to get back to something that functions the way it used to. And
Mm-hmm.
when I think about myself in this equation, it's like there must have been some point along the line where I knew it was already broken. Like, in myself, I was already broken. And if the divorce is a gesture toward repair, then it's healing the self just as much as it's healing the family. And I think that's a common story that I hear, that, and you said too, your kids are seeing a new side of you. They're seeing you in a different kind of space. We recently had our third wedding celebration because in 2001 we got married on Zoom, and then we had calling a ceremoniette last May with my parents, because our parents weren't able to be there at the first wedding with us. And I always knew that I wanted to do a big celebration in Montreal because none of the Montreal people were able to be at our
Mm-hmm.
wedding. And so we had that last month, and the number of people that surprised me by coming up to me and saying, "I've never seen you so happy." And I'm
Oh,
just like, I'm
yay.
living my life out here. I didn't really, that wasn't my intention, really.
Mm-hmm.
That's the natural consequence
Mm-hmm.
of this work. So, I'm guessing that your folks on listening to the podcast might be at various stages of queer divorce stories, but
Mm-hmm.
I think I think keeping yourself at the center, and how is this going to reveal to you how you show up in different ways, and what life could possibly be, it's really invaluable. And again, just a choice. It's just a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. It is just a choice. I know it. And honestly, I think we're both on the other side of it. We're not like 10 years out or whatever, but I think we probably have our listeners that are thinking about, can I get divorced? So you have our people who are in the process of it. We have the people like you and I that are the newbies, kind of getting into it. But I'm now in a spot where I can feel like finally I see the fruits of that labor. I had this goal. I could see where I was supposed to be heading. I can see now my family's getting stronger. We're talking about things in different ways. You know, I made the dedication to that repair and that choice. And I didn't think about it that way when I first decided to get divorced either. When I told my husband, I was thinking I felt like I was in a crisis space, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm in this space where I just can't anymore. So in that moment, it didn't feel like it was going to be a repair. But I had known that, you know, after reading Untamed and, you know, seeing all the things like the Bible of queers who have gotten divorced now, I feel like there's this space of that book didn't make me get divorced, but it definitely showed me that it was okay to get divorced. And I appreciated that about
Yeah,
it.
and
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you brought that up because yeah, I read a bunch of books too. I'm a memoirist. I have
Yeah.
a lot of experience in autobiography, and
Uh-huh.
specifically the way that autobiography and memoir teaches us how to live. We
Mm-hmm.
look to the stories of other people who have gone something through something similar to what we're going through to know that we're going to be okay. So I
Mm-hmm.
take my responsibility as someone on, who's turned a corner in this space
Mm-hmm.
very seriously. I never forget. I never want to forget those sobbing on the floor moments because so
Mm-hmm.
many people are in that space and just like me going, I can't do it. I don't know how many times the one piece of paperwork that got me every time was the holiday schedule that you have to fill out for kids,
Yeah.
like where are they going to be for which holiday. I still get this like anxious heart squeeze thinking about, is this what my kid's life come to? Is
Yeah.
8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Father's Day and every other year. It's just some of those details are horrific. I can't even imagine. I guess I can because I did it, but just that pain is so visceral and
Mm-hmm.
real.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the stories focus so much on the other side of like, yep, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. There are some really beautiful moments for sure. There's still a lot of pain. So if this idea that once you get divorced everything's going to be okay and I'm going to live out my dreams, it's like yeah, that may well be true, but you're not going to. There's so many pictures of me at this third wedding celebration just sobbing. I'm talking about crying a lot on your podcast. But we didn't have a song that we were going to dance to at the so even though we had a 16-hour car trip from Illinois to Montreal to figure this out. We didn't come up with a song, and
Yeah.
it was actually during the ceremoniette, when our officiant said, "Well, somehow you made it here." And I thought, I know what it's going to be. So I went up to the DJ and I requested Somewhere from West Side Story, the Aretha
Mm.
Franklin version, if you're
Get it
it
right.
has
Okay. Hmm.
yeah, because it's that beautiful line of somewhere there's a place for us, there's a time for us, somewhere, somehow, somewhere, and
Hmm.
that's that unknown that you're going into when you make this decision. You don't know what it looks like or how it's going to turn out. It's just trusting that voice that says this is the right thing to do.
Hmm. Yeah. You have to follow your intuition through a moment of intense pain. I think that there's a
Yeah,
lot of stories in our world that we can think about in that, right? Like you lose a parent, God forbid you lose a kid. You know, I don't even believe in God. I don't know why I'm using that phrase. Not everybody knows. Oh shoot, my mom's gonna listen to this. And no. Okay, anyways, I'm just kidding. No, she knows. Okay. I think that there's this space that we get in where we have these moments of grief in our life where we have to make decisions and we have to move forward. And in all of those times, we we learn and grow from it if we are doing it intentionally and listening intentionally to our intuition and, you know, our bodies as we move through it. And I think that divorce is one of those things. You know, a different it's not any different than those things. You're choosing it, but
yeah,
you know, and there's sometimes you can't choose, but it's still that same sort of grief, that same sort of moment. And so for listening to our bodies and being intentional, it's messy and it's hard. And I mean, I have so many journal articles. I'm going on a tangent here about like the beauty of this hard time. Like I've, you know, gotten into the book Bittersweet and just was like in the murky middle and that like messy portion of the pain crying on my floor, but then the next day being like, had this great moment with my kids and my partner, and this is like a beautiful time to rebuild. And I like that. It's so messy and it's a roller coaster. It's a
In
freaking
there.
roller coaster. I know.
Yes, yes,
Oh my
for sure.
gosh.
There are, and I think at least for me, it helps me appreciate those moments a lot more, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not that they're fewer or farther between. It's just I'm paying attention to them more. And even the times when I had a really on the floor moment, I knew, which I'm paying attention to your body. I knew this was the right thing to do. It was just so painful. And I would
Mm-hmm.
just group by just saying, I hate this. I never wanted this and I hate this.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. It didn't keep me from moving forward. It didn't keep me from taking the action that I needed. It was just in this moment, I hate it, and I'm going to close this parenting plan and I will open it up some other time. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's how it has to be. And the whatever leads you to wherever you're going, looking back on it, it is a lot easier to see, oh yeah, in these moments I was. And my whole thing when I started this divorce process was, at the end of this, I want to be able to say I was brave. And that's all I ever focused on was, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to be brave and say what needs to be said. I'm going to be brave and make the appointment with the divorce attorney. I'm going to be brave and file this paperwork. I'm going to be brave when I remind my ex that we need this money for this thing that I've been asking about him
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 times. Like even those ongoing moments of bravery. But that's always what I clung to, is I don't want the story where I took the easy way out, or where and for me the easy way out would have been to deny myself.
Mm-hmm.
That for a long time felt like the easiest thing to do. And so in order to do that, I had to be brave and tell somebody what I needed and say that we were going in a different direction and do that destructive work so that we could rebuild stronger.
Mm-hmm. Whew, I'm so glad that you're here talking to me about this, because I'm connecting with that a little bit. I think that it's an important story to talk about, is that messy middle space and going down that path. And for me too, I'm connecting with that, like denying myself was the easy way. And I think all of us, if we think about that, um, I don't know, as women, there's probably men listening to this podcast too, that if you grew up thinking you had to sacrifice yourself for your marriage or for your partner or for your family or whatever it is, you had the idea that you had to sacrifice yourself for it. And so getting divorced means you're choosing it and you're choosing yourself. And you have to come to the conclusion at that same time that, the crisis is kind of self, like that I can focus on myself and it's going to be okay.
Yep.
And actually it's going to be better for our family if I focus on myself. And that's a
Yep.
wild flip that I don't think I did not grow up thinking.
No, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but I'm starting to enter into spaces where people did not know that I was married before and married
Mm-hmm.
to a man. So now I'm in spaces where people don't know that, and my family configuration as it is right now is all they've ever known about me. And it's
Mm-hmm.
shocking. Someone asked us before, like, so you've got a 10-year-old, like, how did that work? And I just look at them with this, like, huh? What do you mean, how did that work? Forgetting that they didn't know my story before, right?
Yeah.
I say, oh yeah, well, you know, Duncan is my bio kid and I was married before, and I didn't really know that at the time, that there would be a time when this is the story that people would know about me.
Mm-hmm.
And what a difference and a change. It's sort of remarkable. And
Mm-hmm.
I write in that Autostraddle article that one of my favorite things to do while I was getting divorced was watch a Simpsons episode called A Millhouse Divided, and it's when Millhouse's parents get divorced. And it's so funny. I mean, even when I was at my lowest of lows, I found that whole situation just completely absurd. And I was able to look at it from a place of, yeah, this is how I used to think about all of these things. And now I think about them in a totally different way. And, there, this space that you've created for queer divorce is, there's so many particular considerations about it. And we're in a different frame, totally, excuse me, totally different worldview than probably a lot of us grew up with, even if, like I said, I've known all my life that this is who I was, but
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't living out in any substantial way. So I absorbed all of those those lessons of heteronormativity and divorce is failure, and we see all the jewelry ads of engagements and weddings, and there's a certain
Mm-hmm.
plan for how it's supposed to go, right? And when you, as a queer person, whether or not you're out about it, even just making those choices for yourself, you are a model for anybody else who needs to see you being who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another part that I take really seriously. I mean, a lot of the folks that I'm meeting now are young queer folks who they see my family of, um, binary lesbians, raising a kid in our house, and we host monthly gatherings for folks, and that to me says this is possible for you too. You can have this very normal, like, who's
Mm-hmm.
going to change the furnace filter existence that hasn't been a reality for a lot of people for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is important, and thank you for bringing that up, because queer divorce specifically, I mean, legally we couldn't even, queers couldn't even get married until what, 10 years ago. And I know there was always partnership and breakup and all of that, but we have been, as queer people, living in this space that's outside of the norm um, our entire lives. And so the divorce, just a divorce as a queer person, takes on these so many different dynamics that
Yeah.
Heteronormative divorce doesn't. There's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of other things that we don't think about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But, when we started talking about recording this podcast, I picked this day specifically. Now we're recording this on June 27th. June
Mm-hmm.
27th just happens to be the anniversary of Stonewall. And it
Mm.
also happens to be my first wedding anniversary.
Did you know it was the anniversary of Stonewall when you got married the first
I
time?
did not. I did not. But when I found out, I was like, oh, we got married on the 40th anniversary of Stonewall. Wow. And probably, especially for all my fellow late in life lesbians out there, the how did I know? Like, how did I not know that this? I was June 27th, the day that I thought this was a good idea. So yeah, I hope everybody listening can, in the midst of all this chaos and life changes, like, find the fun, find the joy, find yourself, and enjoy it as much as you can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of love out there and a lot of support
Hmm.
from community too. So this podcast, it's so good that you're doing this, Tara, but also helping each other through all these tough
Hmm.
times.
Yeah. The community is essential. Community is good for all of us, but especially the queer community, and finding those spaces where you can advocate for each other and support each other and build each other up and help us all create these alternative lives. Alternative, which is, we could talk all day why we call it alternative, but these lives that are outside of this mainstream life. We're here for each other and are willing to talk about it. I always end, we've kind of been talking about lots of really good pieces of information and lots of really good advice. But I'm wondering if you could think of what is the most important thing for our listeners to keep in mind throughout their divorce, or if they're in the rebuilding process. What would you say to them?
What a question. I feel like I've said a lot of it already, but
Mm-hmm.
I think as you're going through the process to be in the middle of it, that this will all be a funny story someday. All of it.
Mm-hmm.
It might take 50 years, but at some point you're going to look back and laugh. And those parts that are painful, they end up being just uh just something to gloss over, because what you're really going to remember is how brave you were, how you
Mm-hmm.
took the steps that you needed to take, and how strongly and how meaningfully you've impacted the lives of everybody you've come in contact with just by taking these steps. So if it's possible to remember
Mm-hmm.
that, I please do, because anything that you're going through right now is it's one step in a long process.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't particularly profound, but man,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes these moments are not profound. They are about filling out the paperwork, making the call, doing the
Mm-hmm.
file, setting up the account, closing the account, getting the
Mm-hmm.
signature. Ugh,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of
Yeah.
tedious stuff, and it'll just be part of the story someday.
I love that. I love that. The messy, murky part you're in, all those logistics eventually. This being part of your story. That's wonderful.
No one will remember. No one will remember that. They'll just remember who you are.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me today and talking from co-parenting to our, I don't know, we hit on a lot of different topics and I really appreciate that. Thank you for bringing those to me and coming along for the ride. I appreciate that.
Of course, I appreciate you holding the space, and I would encourage anybody listening, if, I try to be a friendly face out in the crowd. So if you want to connect with me, please do. I know, Tera, you've got your amazing community as well. And like we said before, we're all here for you.
We are. And if you want to reach Kate, I'm going to put this in the show notes, but you can find her on Instagram at Kate on the mic or on Substack as Katie Girl. So reach out and find your spaces and connect. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
You.